Today, Quebec's Minister of the Environment said that he would be filing court papers against Energy East. And I have to be clear and pretty frank, I was getting quite ready to come in here with guns blazing about that. But after lengthy and very recent discussions with officials from Quebec, with officials in the Prime Minister's office, and with TCPL, here's where we seem to be at on this action announced this morning by Quebec. It would appear, from what we can make of it, that what is being contemplated here is a review similar to the one that Ontario conducted last fall. Ontario used their public consultations to inform their provincial presentation to the NEB. Indeed, Quebec used a similar one in the past for the Line 9 reversal, and in fact, as you know, that was approved. Our government has been in contact with TCPL, who tell us today that they are absolutely willing to go through this process. Now, I will say, we would be very concerned if this was in fact about a new competing parallel process that requires projects crossing provincial lines to go through multiple hearings and then multiple sets of conditions and formal consent from both the federal government and from each local jurisdiction along the route. And to be quite clear, if we ultimately determine that that's what this is intended to turn into, we will vigorously oppose it, and you will hear a great deal more from me on this. And in the meantime, I will simply keep my holster close at hand. And who knows, maybe you will see those guns blaze. But that does not appear to be where we are at today. Now let me now say a few words about the federal-provincial meetings that are coming up this week in Vancouver. The government of Alberta supports a pan-Canadian approach to climate change, and we support putting a price on carbon to create a market-based incentive to reduce emissions, provided all revenues remain in the province. Canada needs to leave behind its former global brand as climate change deniers, and Canada must therefore leave behind the failed policies of the past. Canada must step up to a new and better role as one of the world's most environmentally progressive economies and one of the world's most environmentally progressive energy producers. First Ministers will also be discussing the economy overall at our meetings in Vancouver. Now, Alberta, as you know, has already called on the federal government to revisit EI rules that exclude most Albertans from coverage. We will also move forward looking to the federal government to work closely with us on major and extensive new investment in infrastructure. And finally, we will continue to make the point that we need the federal government sooner, not later, to play its role in building the national economy and to get built. The Minister said earlier today that it is the federal government's job to ensure that our resources get to market. Canada needs strong and effective federal leadership on this issue. So I'm looking forward to this work, and I'm looking forward to the conversations we will have in Vancouver over the course of the next 2 days. Although I will suggest that today's events do certainly remind us that progress in this country requires a lot of phone calls and a lot of discussions and a lot of work. But we will be there, and we will do that. So I'm happy to take questions.
Brad Wall says that this move is politically divisive. In light of what you now know, do you think that's the case still?
Assuming that this is in fact a move on the part of the Quebec government to have this matter considered under Section 6 of their legislation, this, as I said, is really nothing different than what we've already seen in Ontario and in BC. It's an opportunity for local people to engage with whatever environmental concerns they might have, and it informs the provincial government's submissions to the NEB. And quite frankly, if that's what this is, which again is what we're assuming it is, we look forward to having the new elements of Alberta's record on climate change be part of that discussion and part of that submission. But no, assuming that we're talking about a Section 6 application here, it is not the politically divisive and problematic issue that people might have first thought it was.
Would you have appreciated a call from Quebec to tell you that they were going to do this, or did you receive one?
We did not. Actually, it was us that found out about it first, quite honestly. We've been on the phone on this for about the last 18 hours. So we did become aware of it through both the Minister of Environment and the Quebec Premier in phone conversations yesterday. And we've been working on it since to find out exactly what it is they're talking about.
Would you have liked to be alerted before they took this action?
As I say, we were, because they announced it this morning, and we were advised yesterday. Would have been nice to have gotten 2 weeks' notice, of course, but government doesn't always work that way.
Premier, just to be clear, so you're saying you're assuming that's what their move means?
We're looking
So
at
it hasn't been confirmed by the Quebec Environment Ministry?
The press release that they put out this morning refers to section 6.3, so that's why we think that we're talking about that. But there's been conversations back and forth that had suggested that they somehow wanted more, and so that's where we were concerned, because we thought that meant a different section, section 31, I believe it is, of their act. But it appears now that that's not what we're dealing with. And as I say, though, if that evolves in some fashion, and of course, it's not our action, it's theirs, so that's what we need from them, then we will certainly, there'll be much more to be said on it, because it has much, much more significant implications, not only for TCPL, but quite frankly, for the country as a whole. But I don't think that's where we're at.
If it does progress and there has to be further action, what kind of action could Alberta take on something?
I think, I'm gonna, as I say, I'm gonna leave the gun in the holster until we're actually at the gunfight. And we're not there right now. So we're gonna be monitoring this and keeping a close eye on it. We've retained counsel in Quebec to ensure that they appear, not appear formally, but are able to have eyes on one of the two judicial applications that are relevant to this issue, the first one being tomorrow. And so we'll keep an eye on it. And of course, I'm also meeting with the Premier of Quebec tomorrow morning in Vancouver, so I suspect I'll have a very clear sense of what we're dealing with by then.
Will your government initiate an environmental assessment of this project?
Of the pipeline?
Of the pipeline, to look at any impacts here in future projects? Will your government endeavor to do something similar?
No, we won't. We're confident that this is the right project, and that we can be confident that it's in the best interest overall of Albertans.
Premier, is there anything wrong, though, with Quebec trying to take legal action to make sure energy submits to Quebec environmental review process, if indeed you are incorrect or the perception's incorrect, and that they do want more than what you're thinking that they want right now?
Well, again, we're starting to get into hypotheticals on hypotheticals. As I say, I've spoken with TCPL, and they are quite happy to proceed with the Section 6 process in Quebec, and we support their decision to respond that way. And the mechanism that the Quebec government uses to secure that participation, that's not my call. But what I will say is that I feel very confident that based on a lot of the work that's already happened with TCPL in terms of responding to concerns in Quebec, as well as the upstream efforts that we've been making in terms of our climate leadership plan, that the matter will be well reviewed, and it will be done in a timely way, and that's what's really important.
We're going to go to the phones now. Operator, can you put through the first caller, please? Operator?
Your first question comes from Lucas Meyer with 660 News. Your line is open.
Thank you very much for taking my question. Premier, you mentioned that sit-down time coming up, the more time with Quebec officials. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on just how far you think the two sides are on this, or is there a little bit of perhaps political posturing on the part of Quebec, for their constituents and taking a hard stance? Do you think we really are very, very far apart, and if so, just how far apart are we here?
Well, again, as I say, today, after having made a number of phone calls to officials in the Prime Minister's office, in Quebec's offices, with TCPL, both public officials as well as political officials, we're of the view that this is not actually something that is significantly different than what we've seen in Ontario and in BC, and that therefore we're not that far apart. It's something that will inform the NEB process, and so we're still working within the parameters that we all believed we were. And so that's the assumption. Now, obviously, that, we'll be having conversations with the Premier tomorrow and hearing about any additional concerns that they have. But as things stand now, it is not my view that this represents any kind of significant change in the outlook for TCPL and the work that they're doing. And should that change, though, we'll have a very different response to this.
Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Your next question comes from Rick Bell with Sun Media. Your
Premier. Are you still confident in the approach you're taking? Because you, of course, have critics who say you should be taking a stance maybe a little closer to the Premier of Saskatchewan. Are you still confident in your approach? And when you heard about what you thought it was, were you in any way shaken in the approach you're taking?
When I heard what we thought might have been going on, my view, I don't think was the same as some of the other proponents out there who think that we need to sort of move to a more divisive, name-calling kind of scenario. I will say, in fact, of course, that I am someone who believes very strongly in the strength of our federation and the strength of our nation. And there's no question that I gave a lot of thought to the fact that Alberta has been an exceptionally generous contributor to the overall economic health and social health of our nation, and that within those confines, it makes perfect sense that we would be angry should the same kind of response not be coming our way when our province is in the kind of economic difficulties that we know it is today, and that Albertans are in the kind of economic and social difficulties that they are in today as far as dealing with the job losses that we see in Alberta. So that's the way I viewed it, and driven by that, you might have seen me come out, as I said earlier, with all guns blazing. But I also think that it's important to know your facts and to know what you're talking about, and to make sure that you don't let miscommunication create unnecessary division. And should that change, and should our understanding of what's going on change, then you'll see a different reaction. But right now, it's a big decision to come out very, very aggressively on these kinds of issues. So you need to know that you're doing it for the right reasons, based on all the facts, with a very clear understanding of the outcome you're seeking. And so that continues to be the way I'm going to engage in this. And that's not a change from 2 days ago, and that's not a change from an hour ago. It just is the way I'm going to approach this job for as long as I'm in this.
What does all guns blazing look like?
Well, you know what? I'm just going to give you something to look forward to, so that there's a silver lining in some horrifically bad news. But there's no point in doing it now.
We're going to take 2 more questions from the phone, and then if there's stuff left on the floor, we'll come back. Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Your next question comes from Sean McCarthy with the Globe and Mail. Your line is open. Sean McCarthy with the Globe and Mail. Your line is open. Your next question comes from Chris Varco with the Calgary Herald. Your line is open.
Hi, Premier. I've got a couple of questions here. First one is, can you tell me what is different from this review that Quebec is undertaking and the National Energy Board review? The NEB has obviously authority to look at all the environmental aspects of this pipeline, so I'm not quite sure what's different between what Quebec is proposing here and what the NEB is proposing. And also, have you got any indication from Quebec on whether they're going to be opposing the project when it gets to the NEB?
To answer your last question first, no, I have not. I think they're taking a very sort of issue-based approach to it, looking at what their evaluations will conclude with respect to both the concerns around environmental risk, which I think are pretty minimal, but nonetheless they need to evaluate those, and the concerns around and their interests around economic benefit to Quebec. That being said, the difference is, I mean, the NEB, in our view, is the process that drives this. It is the process that's been set up to deal with cross-provincial infrastructure and energy infrastructure issues. And so in my view, the NEB is the place. It ultimately makes recommendation. It goes to the federal government and the federal cabinet, and they make the decision. However, there are jurisdictions that have determined that they would do their own internal evaluation. So for instance, Ontario, through their energy board, engaged in evaluations and hearings, and then those evaluations and hearings impacted and informed their submission to the NEB. What Quebec has under their legislation is two processes, one that is similar to that, and another one that suggests that no, the actual permitting process and the condition application process rests with the Quebec government. Should it be the case that what we're seeing here is the Quebec's attempt to have TCPL subject to that latter process, that's where we run into a lot of problems. And as I've said before, you will hear a great deal more from me and many others because it has, as I've said, huge implications. But we don't believe that's what it says. And certainly the press release that came out today, very lengthy, does refer specifically to Section 6, which is the process that mirrors the one that I described being used in Ontario.
We're going to take one last question from the phone, and then we'll come back to the floor for Tom and then Darcy. Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Your next question comes from Yelly Ross with the Daily Oil Bulletin. Your line is open.
Hi, the only thing I sort of wanted to confirm, are we talking about the BAP process, the Bureau process, their own regulator process that starts next week, or is this in addition or separate from that?
No, this is that process.
Okay, that explains. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Premier BC, I mean, through after the review, they came out with a list of 5 demands isn't the right word, but are you concerned that after this review, Quebec will come out with a list of conditions to add on to whatever conditions BC would have for pipelines going that way, Ontario this way?
Well, I think that, I don't want to get into discussions about hypothetical situations and what we would do, and I certainly don't want to start giving them ideas for conditions that I'd rather they not introduce. So, that is the process that they will go through. At the end of the day, though, this is, in my view, something that goes through the NEB, and it's a decision of the federal government. And as I've said repeatedly, and you said it certainly when the Prime Minister was here, and we'll say it again over the next course or on Thursday when we meet directly with the Prime Minister, that it is the federal government's role to build these kinds of infrastructure projects. Other people have said it, and I will say it again. This is this century's railway. If we are going to build this country, we must get a pipeline to Tidewater. This continues to be a fundamental component of our economy, and we just need to grow up and ensure that we act like a 21st century energy producer, and that is the role of the federal government.
Darcy?
Can I ask you 2 questions? One, do you know how long this is going to delay the process? And 2, regarding the meeting in Vancouver, will a floor for carbon tax nationally, how will that help Alberta in the long term if that's what is decided?
Well, first of all, with respect to the first thing, it's my understanding that the process that's being contemplated is not one that would necessarily delay what is already underway with respect to the NEB. So it ought not to. It will be a parallel process, and then it would inform the Quebec government submissions on behalf of the citizens of Quebec to the NEB. In answer to your second question, as I've said, I think that Canada has to move forward with respect to climate change action. I want to see an outcome in Vancouver that, of course, respects and acknowledges the work that Alberta has done thus far. And I also want to ensure that when we look at things like a carbon levy or a carbon tax or price on carbon, that whatever revenue is created from that process stays in the jurisdiction where it's raised. And so those are the fundamental points that we need to work with. I think that the discussion on carbon change is quickly evolving across the whole country, and Alberta's interests are to ensure that the work that we've committed to doing is seen as adequate, and I believe it will be, because I think, in fact, it represents probably, in many aspects of it, the biggest move in the country.
Thanks, everyone.